I don't know what's brought you here this evening, what's led to you asking this question. People ask this question, why would God allow so much suffering, for a number of different reasons. Sometimes they ask it more kind of theoretically, but other times they're asking it because they are in the midst of, or those they know and love are in the midst of, very acute suffering. It's not a theory question for them. It is a question that their heart is asking deeply from experience. This evening, I won't be able to fully answer the theory question or the personal question, but my hope is that we will get some way. My hope is that this evening we will see that Christianity has a better answer to the question of suffering than anyone else has to offer. It won't answer every question, but my hope, my aim is that it will give us a foundation from which we are able to deal with grief and able to have hope. I want to start by telling you about my first experience with this question: why does God allow so much suffering? I was 13 years old. At that point, I was raised Jewish, but kind of was an agnostic by this point. I went into an RE lesson at school, and our teacher put up a triangle that looks like this one up on the board. On one side, it said God is all loving. On another, it said God is all powerful. And on the other, it said there is suffering in the world. And my atheist RE teacher made the very simple observation that if God is all loving, he would want to stop suffering. If God is all powerful, he would be able to stop suffering. But there is suffering in the world, and therefore, either God is not all loving, or God is not all powerful, or he doesn't exist at all. Those are the three basic options. 13-year-old me went away from that lesson going, oh, that's simple. God doesn't exist, or at least the God of the Bible doesn't exist. I'm standing here this evening, which means my mind has been changed on that. We'll come back later to why I think that triangle doesn't work as an argument. But before we do, I want to show us the alternative to a Christian answer. There are a number of different alternatives, but the main one in our culture is that kind of atheist option. So let's think about that. It is the option that says there is no God at all, and therefore we as people are nothing more than just material, matter, molecules. Richard Dawkins sums up this position clearly, although with a lot of fancy language, but here's what he says. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky. You won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. He goes on to say, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And there is consistent logic to that approach. He says, if we are just in a universe where everything is blind and it's just physical matter reproducing itself, if there is nothing more than that, if we are just made up of elements, some people's lives are better, some people's lives are worse. We shouldn't try to understand it. We shouldn't fight against it. We shouldn't seek justice. There is just going to be suffering and pain in the world. It's just the reality. He says the universe as we see it suggests no design, no purpose, no evil or no good. Just blind, pitiless indifference. Give him credit, he is consistent. But if you take that view to its logical conclusion, what you get is a bunch of things that we do not actually end up agreeing with, that no one does, really. If you take that to its logical conclusion, you have to end up saying the strong are going to beat the weak, and that's okay. That is just the way the world is, survival of the fittest. Every time the strong triumph over the weak, we shouldn't be upset about that. That shouldn't outrage us. That's just the universe working itself out. In fact, you can't even really say suffering is a thing. All it is just a change in the intensity of some things in your brain, some chemical balances shifting slightly. And so you can't look at pain and say this is genuinely sad. It's just a bunch of chemical reactions. There is no way you can look at evil and call it evil, because on what basis is it evil? It just is the way it is. You can't have any hope of a happy ending. You can't look for reason in your suffering. It's just the way it is. And the best thing you can do is just accept it and move on. That is the consistent position an atheist has to take. But here's the thing. I have never met someone who actually lives like that. I doubt you have either, because that position is actually unlivable. To say that death, pain, and suffering, that's just a part of life that we should all just accept. You shouldn't get upset. It just is the way it is. I've never met an atheist who, when they sit with their suffering friend or family member, says, oh, you just have to accept it. What do they want to do in that moment? They reach for words of comfort. They reach for words of hope, even though that cuts against what they actually believe. Because that is the only thing they can do. They know in that moment they want to say something positive, and so they just have to say something that really they deep down doesn't agree with what they suppose to think. And none of that proves that there is a God. But what it does prove is the atheist argument against God based on suffering is pretty weak, because their answer is basically unlivable. My hunch is this evening that whether or not you agree with the Christian claims about suffering, you don't want the atheist option to be true. You don't want the option that says suffering isn't really a thing, you just have to accept whatever comes to you, that's just life. You don't want that to be true. My claim is that the Christian option is much, much better. That if it is true, it is a claim that is much better news. So we're going to sketch out the Christian answer, and it really is a sketch. There is so much more we could say, but here's where we're going to start. We're just going to see three very quick things about suffering. It's real, it's purposeful, and it's temporary. Real, purposeful, temporary. Firstly, real. We saw that atheism can't really look evil in the face and call it evil. Dawkins said at the universe there is no good and no evil. The Bible, time and time again, looks at horrific things and calls them evil. And it can do that because it comes with the moral authority of the one who has made all things. Being a Christian allows you to look at suffering and say, this is real and this is wrong. God in the Bible saves some of his most condemnatory language for those who exploit power to abuse the weak. Because that is evil. And God can say that, and he can ground that in his authority. I don't know what kind of suffering you've been on the other end of, but my hunch is deep down in those moments of suffering, every bone in your body wants to be able to say, this is not good, this is not how it should be. Every brain impulse is saying, there must be something better than this. This must not be what we were made for. Well, Christianity gives you the foundations to be able to make those kind of statements. Nothing else does. And the God of the Bible doesn't just know that suffering is real from a distance. He knows it personally. Because ultimately, the Christian answer to the question of suffering is not a philosophical answer. It is a personal answer. Because God took on flesh and came into this world. Jesus, God walking on earth 2,000 years ago, suffered. He suffered pain. He suffered grief. One of the most famous things that happens in Jesus' life is one of his friends dies. His friend is called Lazarus, and he dies, and Jesus is there at Lazarus' tomb, and he's about to raise him from the dead, but before he does that, he weeps. Why does he weep? Because death is a painful and a sad thing. The Bible gives us words that mean we're able to say those kind of things and mean it. Suffering is real. Being a Christian allows you to say that. Suffering is purposeful. You see, the non-God option makes suffering utterly, completely meaningless. Whereas Christianity says it isn't at all. Let's go back to that triangle for a moment. I set it up, so let's kind of unpick it now. The triangle works like this, to remind you. If God is all loving, he would want there to be no suffering. If God is all powerful, he could make sure there was no suffering, but suffering exists. The problem with that is it makes one really, really big assumption. And the big assumption is this: we can know what reasons God has for something. And that is why this completely falls down. Because it's possible, we have to grant it is at least possible that if there is a God, he might have a reason we don't understand. Let me give you an example of that. It's inadequate, but I think it tells us something. If you're a parent, you'll know one of the worst things in your parenting experience is the moment you take your little child in for one of their vaccinations. It is a horrible moment where you are kind of there holding your child who you love dearly as a doctor kind of rams a needle into them, and the child kind of makes eye contact with you and goes, "You're my safe person. Why are you letting this horrible man or woman inflict pain on them? Why aren't you stopping them?" To which what you desperately want to do as a parent is to be able to sit your child down and say, "I know this won't make sense yet, but trust me, when you're older, you'll thank me for this." If that is true at a human level, that a human is willing to inflict suffering on someone they love in order to protect them in the long run, to do them good in the long run, we have to grant that it is at least possible that God does the very same thing. And therefore, we cannot say that an all-powerful, all-loving God would not allow suffering. He might. He might have his reasons. And in fact, he experienced the clearest example of purposeful suffering there ever has been. Jesus of Nazareth, he ended his life in an agonizing way. He was hung up on a cross. He went through incredible physical pain. He went through emotional distress that we can't even begin to really understand. And he did all of that with a purpose. If you read one of the gospel accounts of Jesus' life, and there's some free copies to pick up if you'd like to, they make it very clear that Jesus doesn't go to the cross by accident. He chooses to go there. He has a purpose in going there. And his purpose is to die to save people. We're not going to unpack loads of what that means. But there in Jesus, there is a clear example of purposeful suffering. God can have a purpose in suffering. Suffering is real. Suffering is purposeful. Finally, suffering is temporary. You see, Jesus doesn't stay hanging on a cross. He ends up being put in a tomb. He doesn't stay in that tomb either. The Sunday after he's crucified, he bursts out of the tomb, risen from the dead. And what does that tell us? It tells us lots of things. But one of the things he tells us is that death isn't the end. Death is a new beginning. Jesus is the prototype, if you will, the first one, and there'll be many more to follow. All those who trust him will be raised like he is raised. And they will be raised to a life without suffering. Some words are going to appear from the very last book of the Bible. This is what God says is in store for people who trust in him. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Notice how intimate that picture is. Who do you let wipe tears from your eyes? Not strangers. Only the most trusted people in your life. God will come that close that he will, so to speak, wipe every tear from your eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. The old order of things has passed away. God says that one day there will be no more suffering, but suffering is temporary. The other option is that suffering is just part of life, and when life ends, you die, and that's that. Or you get reincarnated and you start the cycle of suffering all over again. Only Christians can say suffering is truly temporary and that there's something better to come. Suffering is real. Suffering is purposeful. Suffering is temporary. That won't have answered every single question that you've got. But I hope it's shown you something of the emptiness of the alternative option. And but it's made you want this to be true. Next week, we're going to think about the question of whether the Bible is outdated and unreliable, because if we want this to be true, we need to then know if it is true. And that's what we'll think about together next Sunday. Do join us for that if you're able to. For now, it's a hot evening. Go grab yourself another drink. In a few minutes, we'll come back for Q&A.